Compared to the Beatles, they sold more records in 1967, but there was never any bliss after the member fell into alcoholism following giving up sleeping on a mat in an inexpensive another person felt confined by the boarding house. His reputation, which destroyed his marriages, and success in mental health turned into a prison. 3 members perished in 9 years, and one from an unexpected cardiac arrest, another from uncommon malignancy, and the third only a few weeks following their final tour. Just one still has to share their heartbreaking tale of the Monkees. It all began with a straightforward concept that Bob Rafelson had always envisioned, creating a TV program about a band that is having trouble. However, nobody seems to be interested in the Beatles. Underwent a complete transformation in 1964. The film A Hard Day's Night became viral all over the globe, and then Rafelson's concept didn't appear to be as wild with his Bert Schneider, a partner, revised the idea they wished to develop in the Beatlemania in the United States magic, but it wasn't just that for TV. The Beatles served as inspiration for its construction. Mirror them to persuade NBC to the initial pilot of the show wasn't simple. Tested badly, viewers failed to understand the actor's attire gave the performance a gritty appearance. Mickey Dolenz's clothing and their own were even given credit under his previous stage name. The majority of CEOs wanted to see Mickey Braddock throw everything out, but Rafelson didn't give up and took a big chance. Updated the pilot again and included snippets from actors' auditions revealing their true personalities rather than merely this daring maneuver by the characters worked. The new NBC tried the version through the roof. Wanted 2 complete seasons in a hurry. Had begun as an insane do-it-yourself endeavor. Abruptly developed into a full-fledged TV program winning Emmys and transforming television ages. But the Monkees weren't simply regarding entertainment behind the scenes, it was Columbia Pictures' business machine. Understood just what they were doing with the TV. The purpose of the presentation was not only to make people laugh, that was for record sales. Lunchboxes, posters, toys, and even Davy Jones plays executive Jackie Cooper. In 1967, Columbia publicly acknowledged it. More records were sold by the Monkees than the Together, the Rolling Stones, and the Beatles. Their debut album remained at the top of the charts for 13 weeks in a row and hardly left their wool in the charts for more than a year. Trading cards, board games, and cap store shelves were stocked, but the Monkees weren't simply put, they were an empire. They discovered that the Monkees were equally untamed. September, an advertisement appeared in Daily Variety in 1965, and it yelled at the Hollywood Reporter. There were madness auditions for 4 crazy males between the ages of 17 and 21. They desired musicians, but more significantly, they desired the type of energy that you could find at an establishment similar to Ben Frank's coffee shop. In about 437 Hollywood hundreds showed up. Aspirants waited in line, hoping to see television. Some well-known figures even tried out for celebrity. Stephen Stills tried out, but was rejected. Depressed because to his poor teeth, and Paul Williams with thinning hair, who would later writing massive hits, didn't work out. Danny Hutton and Harry Nilsson of 3 Dog Nights made an effort during Rafelson and Schneider's auditions would tamper with the candidates to observe their. Michael Nesmouth responded by showing up, fearing someone while toting a laundry bag. If he left it outside, someone would steal it. When Peter Tork retaliated, they removed his chair from beneath him. Their unexpectedly fast responses were helpful. Get them the parts. And no, in spite of there are claims that Charles Manson never tried out. There was no way the Final Four could have been greater. Davy Jones was already well known. A Broadway performer, who previously shared a TV The Beatles evening on the Ed Sullivan Show, that he had a contract with Columbia prior to the Monkees' arrival. Notion that Mickey Dolenz was a kid star of the television program Circus Boy, and had to modify his drumming due of a childhood illness that impacted his hip. Only Michael Nesmith was able to truly viewed and responded to the initial liquid paper was created by his mother. Thus, he didn't actually require the funds, and the eldest, Peter Tork, was from the folk scene in Greenwich Village and only arrived as a result of his friend Stephen Stills recommended it after receiving rejected himself. Some detractors referred to some claimed they weren't deserving of it. Not only their notoriety, but the Monkees' also various roles, they turned into a legitimate band, selling and altering millions of albums TV and developing a new type of phenomenon in pop culture that began as the bizarre experiment ultimately shaped the future of music television, and the concept in general of what being an adolescent idol meant. Don Kerzner was employed to supervise the Monkees TV show's soundtrack. He created a system with a single focus, creating successful recordings for him. But it didn't matter whether the band was able to perform instruments or not. His only desire was achievement, and he had no faith in the four young men were employed to deliver for the show. Instead, he introduced the Wrecking, a team of top-tier studio musicians who had contributed to innumerable hits. The When Monkees were instructed to sing, that was Louis Shelton, a guitarist, created the well-known opening to Last Train to Clarksville, engaged in additional monkey play. More tracks than any other session musician. Kerzner stated rather bluntly that he had songs to sing and a TV show to run, deliver, even if doing so required chopping the band out, but he did relocate recording sessions from California to keep the Monkees at bay, New York, from the action at which the formula operated first. For 0.5 million copies of their debut record were sold. Copies in a single month. However, the situations in which the band was becoming enraged. Peter Tork and Michael Nesmith had actual musical training. They weren't just actors posing as rock stars. They had played in clubs and enjoyed the life. They earned their keep by observing others as they sat on the chair, record the songs. Nesmith was humiliated by the sidelines. Unable to contain his rage, he told Rolling how soul-crushing it was to imitate stone efforts of others rather than creating something he thought was his own. It was the duty of Monkees to bring something genuine for their followers in the manner that the Beatles had performed. But Mickey Dolenz softly grumbled to Nesmith's friends, was prepared to battle, so he persisted, allowing them to record their own content, and a few of his tunes were approved, but he still lacked actual authority. The situation worsened when Kerzner released more of the record, their second album, without even informing the Monkees about the cover featured a corny J.C. Penney picture session, and the liner notes oddly expressed gratitude. The band, Kerzner himself, didn't even receive advance copies that they needed to distribute and purchase the album just like everyone else. The breaking point was reached shortly after one day. At a Beverly Hills, Nesmith meeting eventually erupted in rage over being he punched a hole straight while being ignored. Turned to Kerzner via the wall, alerting him to the possibility that it might be your face. All of the people in the room were aware of Kerzner had changed a few weeks prior, had issued a single covertly in Canada, spoiling a performance without the band's consent. Shaky deal that had been negotiated in an effort to give the band more influence even despite being taken from the trust. the single was eliminated at the same time the hole in the wall came to represent everything that the Monkees had been battling: the false impression, the loss of authority. Kerzner's sense of being puppets was dismissed shortly after the producers of the show recognized that the Monkees were too well-liked to substitute. But Kerzner was not with him. When the band was at last free, they left the remaining music that he had requested and have to work according to their own schedule. Barricaded themselves in Studio C at RCA. For weeks while breathing, documenting, and living what would be the headquarters, they jammed in the studio and slept there. Claimed that they honored Mickey Dolenz. Later claimed that it was chaotic and wild, and vibrant, and everything that was there before this time. They played albums that had been lacking. Their own instruments, creating on the album's original songs, raced to the top of the charts. It achieved double platinum status, making it the world heard the Monkees for the first time. The band's long-held desire to sound ironic following expulsion. Kerzner discovered the Archies, his ideal band. They never responded because they weren't genuine, despite winning the creative as a Monkee control life was anything. However, the TV show's filming was simple, draining as opposed to lengthy takes like the show was cut into various sitcoms. Brief sequences and short filming sessions frequently created solely to increase record sales between filming, and the band was going on promotional tours. When pushed to the limit, everything deteriorated. When they were dispatched on a full tour by Columbia, the producers initially opposed it. They believed the band couldn't pull off live performances, but the Animals demonstrated they performed poorly at their first show in Hawaii. Was popular, and demands quickly increased. Even more while filming and recording week after week, day after day, until the vitality that brought them fame began to wear thin. In the TV show's second season, when the concert began, you could see the modifications. Their hair was longer, and the episodes and the clothing were different. Become unfamiliar, the creators allowed the bands improvise more frequently, and occasionally whole situations were created spontaneously. While some episodes were successful, others seemed to the group was caught phoning it in. Between the needs of the market and artistic dream, commentators took note of the carelessness. However, they also observed the drive. The program began stealing techniques from European art. Films have strange rapid cuts, abrupt cuts, and narratives that didn't usually make sense, but occasionally it seemed more akin to a bizarre dream than a children's comedy. However, there was a genuine reason behind the madness. Conflict regarding the identity of the Monkees, and what Davey hoped they would become. Jones's most significant altercation wasn't with it was either record executives or producers. With the persona he was compelled to, he wasn't merely performing on the show. He had a cost because he was Davey. In public, he was the adorable hottie that in private, the ever-youthful idol. Don Davey had begun his career as a well-known in England as a theater performer. He had his Broadway credentials, even showed up on Ed Sullivan's show, The Beatles Night. But none of that now mattered wherever he went. People thought he would be grinning like Davey. Seemingly flawless, he later acknowledged that he was pushed to the brink by pressure, which affected his spouses, children, and mental health. By his late 20s, Davey's health was already being handled as though it were yesterday's news, and he carried scars from it for the remainder of his life, which ended in 2012. It wasn't simply a person's death. It was the closing of a previously open chapter brimming with potential. Peter Torres' voyage wasn't any simpler than it had been. Into the primates, using a genuine musician's soul, he desired for the group to remain a band. But most of the time, he felt totally alone. He then declared that he thought them more than anyone else's notion of the group. However, it appeared that no one else shared the procedure of capturing the dream was exhausting. While others made jokes about banging, Torque felt like he was playing tambourines all day, was observing a genuine opportunity pass. Using his fingertips, he resorted to later, he was candid about doing drugs, acknowledging that he was the first monkey to intoxicated, and that ultimately they all joined him, and what began as marijuana turned into blossoming into a yearning to try everything power, crazy parties, fancy vehicles, etc. might make the discomfort go away, but alcohol showed the most hazardous. Peter was a heavy drinker. Years before he eventually grew up in his fight in the 1980s demonstrated how the wounds were severe and came from those wild, but years of profoundly perplexing Monkees. When the debut album by Monkees was published on October 10, 1966, no one anticipated what was going to. It didn't happen that their self-titled debut simply make a splash, and it will explode. Increased in the Billboard 200 ranking, and remained at the top for 13 weeks straight, which is unusual for even the Beatles. A brand new band that had just published their highly acclaimed Revolver was unable to stay at the top location after the Monkees showed up, and America wasn't the only country to capture Monkee. The album Mania peaked at the top of the charts, and the critics in the UK the next year also didn't unsure of how to interpret it. Several observed the Monkees as an artificially produced group, less for actual music but more for TV. Although none of fans cared about that, the record continues to sell over 5 million copies and received a quintuple platinum certification. Wasn't a one-time achievement either. Later, the Monkees would have forced something about consecutive #1 albums. Even the largest rock bands found it difficult to accomplish, while the record was at the top of the charts. One such song dominated the I Believe in the World, written by a young Mickey Dolenz and Neil Diamond, sang reached the top spot in America at the conclusion of 1966 and was unable to relocate for 7 weeks in a row. It ended the year as a huge hit and kept the momentum going into 1967, became the single that sold the most copies of the year. The song was played wherever you turned. Was performing in the UK and the US, Canada, Ireland, New Zealand, and Australia. It was praised by critics as well. A dancer who makes an immediate impression, and Cashbox commended its appealing sound and harmonics, which continued to be a pop culture behemoth, gaining recognition in the Rolling Stones ranking of the best. Neil Diamond's greatest songs later recorded a rendition of it. However, it was the recording by Monkee that turned into the one that everyone recalled as their stardom soared, and a wild claim began claiming that the Monkees sold in 1967 more records than the Beatles, and it sounded like the Rolling Stones merged. Unbelievable, and the reason for that is that one of the Monkees, Mike Nesmouth, was there. Subsequently acknowledged that he made it up he stated in a 1977 interview that he didn't trust reporters and made the decision to have a brief enjoyable, but when the piece was published, it took on its own, even if major Rolling Stone and other magazines repeated it, as well as whether it was still made up years later. Tall tales weren't necessary for the Monkees. To demonstrate their accomplishments, they had 4 top-charting albums in a single year, controlled the charts for over half of a continuous year, and sold millions of records worldwide in just 2.5 for a group that some people didn't even believe it was genuine. The legacy that Monkees left behind was extremely. By early 1968, the True Deal, all NBC employees, including the Monkees, they believed that the play had run its course. Steam had first been a big success, generating excellent reviews and supporting the Even Out. The band sells 35 million CDs. Selling the Rolling Stones and the Beatles. Stones joined forces, but the episodes began sensation identical, and the enchantment was the fading. NBC chose to call it off after only 2 seasons. The last episode, Mickey Dolenz writing, parroted the television industry itself, even had a eerie, wicked eye that mesmerized spectators. A critique of the folk singer Tim in the industry. Buckley concluded the performance with the eerie tune to the siren that sounds almost like a letter of farewell. Suppose the show had been the Monkees had ambitious aspirations to alter everything. Simply stop watching sitcoms, songs and live performances, but they never got the possibility that following the cancellation that the band left the American later. Spotlight. Peter Tork stated, "We traveled to the Far East, produced a film and a TV show, but in America, we simply vanished, which is why nothing else we did take off." Following the conclusion of the TV show, the Monkees attempted to change who they were. Using the film Head, it was their daring attempt to escape their faked image. Yet the strategy was successful. In Their Faces had cost $750,000 was needed to create, and earned just at the box office $16,000 was a disaster. By Jack Nicholson assisted in writing any legislation. It during intense, drug-fueled encounters with Bob Raffles' son, the film's director didn't even attempt to conceal its meaning, and Mickey Dolenz leaps in the opening sequence from a bridge in a symbolic death later. A phony rendition of the band performed phrases such as, "You say we're manufactured." We all agree that they wanted to share that. The world, they were not merely a merchandise, but their adolescent supporters didn't recognize it, and the grown-ups they desired stayed away, even from the movies. To impress ads with only a man's forehead were odd. As the word head gradually emerges, critics detested it. According to one new according to the New York Times, it was only worth watching. The failure of the film, if you were high, destroyed any preparations for a future movie and damaged their standing. Even the hardly touched the soundtrack, peaking at only number 45, which is very different from their previous hits. Behind the Scenes were disintegrating in December 1968. After deciding he couldn't handle it, Peter Tork no longer, he purchased the final 4 years of his contract. Payment $150,000 a year is a significant sum of money. Then, Tork had truly desired to depart 2 years prior, but was persuaded to. He later claimed he didn't care about staying. Regarding the recognition or honors, he simply desired to perform live music. Recording sessions made him even more irritated. Stated that Davy Jones would complete his portions of the tambourine rapidly, while the rest they fought for hours to obtain. The Davy grew fatigued, and Mickey lost his way. Mike desired complete control over. He left his own music. Tork feeling alone, continuing to have faith in the band, while the others had tuned out psychologically. The band performed a TV special after a gold wristwatch that read, "From the Men at Work." It was intended as a jest, but it signaled the end of a period. Tork later started his own band, attempting for years to transcend being. At last, the man from the Monkees, reconciling with his past with the organization, continued to contract. When Tork departed, Mike, Mickey Dolenz, Nesmouth, and Davy Jones attempted to keep things going as planned. 2 albums, each of which would have their own side. Ultimately, the Monkees managed to release a single album. In 1970, the unraveling of the present continued. Additionally, Mike Nesmouth gave up on the inability to control, leaving only Mickey and Davy were committed to completing their contracts. So they made a recording of Changes, the previous album, although it was evident that the Monkees' time was over. Their most recent recording session took place, and even their last single was released in September 1970. Was a mess that was made public under the Davy Jones and Mickey Dolenz have the wrong names. Missing the name of the Monkee entirely later, it seemed to be the last blow. Said that he had no idea what he wanted more. Half the time he made an effort to maintain the band's unity. The other half he simply wanted to flee and go to bed after Davy Jones and the Monkees split up in 1970. Believed he could transition into a solo with ease. Throughout his career, he remained a big name, but in 1971, fame can be difficult. He was signed by Bell Records, and instead of granting him liberty, they restrained him. Couldn't